So good evening, everybody. Welcome. This is the last online briefing in the series of briefings that we've held to introduce the draft local nature recovery strategy for Kent and Medway to the people of Kent. I've had the honour of doing all of the presentations, which have all been 90 minutes long, and my voice is starting to wobble a bit. So apologies if I suddenly go a bit of hoarse at some point into the meeting or have to pause for some water. I didn't realise my vocal cords weren't quite up to such a marathon of presentations. As you will have guessed from me saying I'll start the recording, we are recording the session, so you may wish to turn your camera off. And please can I ask that everyone ensures their microphones are muted during the presentation sessions, just because that makes it a much easier listening for everyone else on the briefing. We will be having a 90-minute session this evening, and it'll be broken down into 3 parts. The first part will be an overview of what a local nature recovery strategy is and why it is that we find ourselves needing these strategies. So apologies for those of you that have actually been involved at any point during the course of the strategy's development, because you will probably hear quite a lot of things that you already know in this regard. But I want to make sure that everyone who's on the call today really fully understands what it is that the strategy is aiming to do. Then we go into part 2, which will be an overview of what we're actually proposing within the strategy in terms of local nature recovery. And then finally, the final session will be an introduction to what we understand is the mechanisms, the way in which the local nature recovery strategy will be used to inform nature recovery at the local level. After each of those sessions, we will have a question and answers. Please use the Slido to log your questions, and Chris will manage all of the Q&A for me, because once I have the slides up, I can't actually see anything. So Chris Drake is here to assist on that front. And please don't use the chat, as we're not able to monitor that during the course of this presentation. I will make sure that there's a copy of the presentation circulated to you after this meeting, so don't worry about having to scribble everything down. You will get a copy of the slides, and also we are recording it, so you'll also be sent a copy of the recording, so you can rewatch at your leisure and share with any colleagues or peers that you feel might also be interested. Like I said, it's a 90-minute session. After part 2, and depending on how we're doing for time, I might offer you all a 5-minute break if time allows. That will be entirely down to yourselves, but we'll see how we're doing for time when we get to that point. So that's all the housekeeping out of the way, and I will now get on with the actual presentation itself. So first of all, looking at what a local nature recovery strategy is. So we start initially to consider why it is that we need to recover nature. Now, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the 2023 State of Nature report that painted some pretty bleak facts and figures about the state of nature within the UK. This showed that UK species abundance had declined on average by 19% since 1970. And it also showed that 1 in 6 species of the species that were assessed, 1 in 6 of these were threatened with extinction. And of those species assessed, already 151 of those had been lost, had become extinct. And perhaps a causing factor, certainly in relation to those extinctions, was the fact that only 1 in 7 of the UK's important habitats for wildlife were found to be in good condition. And all of this coupled together sort of doesn't bring us to the surprising position that the UK is currently classified as one of the world's most nature depleted countries. When we then take this down to the local level, unfortunately, that national picture is very much reflected. In 2022, the Kent Nature Partnership instructed its own State of Nature report, and this found some very sort of familiar and similar findings. It showed that 10% of our assessed species were threatened with extinction, and also over 30% of our SSSIs were found to not be in favourable condition. And when you consider that these are the areas in the county that are home to our most rare and endangered species and should actually represent England's best wildlife and geological sites, it's actually quite concerning that so many of our sites are not in favourable condition. And also associated with this, and no doubt a causing factor in that, but just generally across the whole of the county, that it was found that there had been a decline in the area of land under conservation management. Another stat that is no doubt not a surprise to you is that the majority of our rivers and lakes, and also now we find our coastal waters, are not meeting good ecological status. And when you couple this with the fact that we have a growing population, growing at a rate that is well above average, it means that concerns such as habitat fragmentation and loss and increasing pollution levels, which come with an increasing population and the infrastructure demands this places, it means that we really are unlikely to see any change without significant intervention. So action to address this desperate picture is not just for nature's sake alone, although I would argue that that is a good enough cause, but also the fact that we rely on nature for so many services that it provides. It provides provisioning services such as food and drink, water supply that we need not just to live, but also to undertake many of our agricultural and other producing facilities. And it also supplies us with building materials that we use extensively. Nature also provides us with regulating services. It gives us clean air, it stores carbon, and it also provides pollination that so many of our farming and agricultural services in the county rely on. It supports us by providing us with healthy soils and cycles our nutrients. And finally, it also provides us with cultural services such as physical and health and well-being, tourism and recreation. And tourism and recreation also have an economic association, as do actually so many of these other services, not just in terms of the commodities that it might supply, and therefore there is a finance associated with that, but also in the fact that these services, if they weren't being provided by nature, we would have to find an engineered solution to them, and that would obviously come with a cost. So not just for nature's sake, but also for our own survival and also for the economic integrity of the county, we really do need to think about what we do to recover nature. In response to the decline of nature and the fact that we do so heavily rely upon nature for the services it provides, the government in 2022 published legally binding targets that were aiming to protect our environment, to clean up our air and rivers, and to boost nature. And in respect of nature, these legally binding commitments pledge to end the decline of nature and for nature to recover. And recognising that any recovery of nature would require targeted and localised, coordinated and collaborative action, the Environment Act in 2021 set up a requirement for the development of local nature recovery strategies, which brings us to where we are today. So as I said, a local nature recovery strategy is a legal requirement that results from the Environment Act, and there will be 48 of these created across England with no gaps or overlaps. And if you consider that each local nature recovery strategy is effectively a piece of a jigsaw, these all link together and create a blanket coverage across the whole of England. To ensure that these do work at the boundaries and that they do successfully link up and create that blanket coverage, the development of the local nature recovery strategies are led by regulations and a statutory guidance, and all responsible authorities have been provided a grant from DEFRA. They are developed at a landscape scale and are essentially a DEFRA document, but the development of them is appointed to a responsible authority. So in the case of Kent and Medway, Kent County Council was appointed the responsible authority for the development of the local nature recovery strategy. But it's important to note that this is not a Kent County Council strategy. This is a strategy that we have prepared for DEFRA on behalf of the county. And finally, because this is a strategy that is not our own, but is owned by all of the county, it was really important that this was developed collaboratively. So what we get to is, or what DEFRA are intending is that locally we will agree our priorities and the actions that are required for nature recovery, and that collectively these will provide, when joined together, a nature recovery network for the whole of England that will work towards that legally binding commitment to decline nature and support its recovery. If I could just ask everyone to check their microphones are switched off, that would be brilliant. Thank you. So in Kent and Medway, we set about developing a strategy that would provide a set of agreed priorities for nature recovery, and sitting alongside these priorities would be measures that would deliver on the priorities. This would effectively provide us with a shared vision for nature recovery, and also would help to embed the use of nature-based solutions within the county. And collectively, this would develop a framework for joined up action. And because it was developed with those who would be instrumental in its delivery, we would result in a strategy that was not only ambitious, but also realistic and deliverable. And that deliverability was further enhanced by the fact that it's linked to supporting mechanisms and finance that I'll come to in the third part of the presentation. But also, this strategy is not just about words. It spatially frames the action for nature and looks to focus action to where it's most needed and where it will deliver the greatest benefits. So I think it's useful to just pause at this moment to fully understand what the strategy will and won't do. So although it is a spatial strategy, it will not draw localised, detailed or definitive boundaries, but instead identifies broad areas where action is likely to provide the greatest gains. And although it will suggest and identify potential measures that could be taken to support nature recovery, those actions are not dictated and their implementation is not instructed by the local nature recovery. So consequently, we will not see landowners or managers forced to make changes to the way they use their land or manage the land or undertake their operations as a result of the local nature recovery strategy. But changes and actions will be incentivised because the local nature recovery strategy will be linked to a range of government grants and funding. And as I said, I'll come to that in the third part of the presentation. Something else that I will touch on at the end of the presentation will be the fact that the local nature recovery strategy does not offer any statutory protection to land, nor does it prevent development from happening. What it will do will have a statutory role in terms of informing future local plans, new plans coming forward, and also will have an involvement in terms of planning applications and development management, as it has an informing role that relates to biodiversity net gain. And finally, we will not end, this does not end in 2025 when we publish, hopefully in the summer. And arguably, once published, that's when the real work begins, because that's when we have to start delivering on those actions. And when I'm saying we, I mean we collectively as a county. Further to this, also, the strategy will not just remain static. It will be reviewed, revised and republished on a regular cycle. And that review will be instructed by the Secretary of State, and that must happen every 3 to 10 years. And so the idea is that over time, as the local nature recovery strategy is fully embedded in terms of how we manage our land and how we plan for land use, that we will see action investment directed to areas of greatest need and benefit, but also in time, losses and impacts will be directed away from our most valuable assets. In developing the strategy, we followed a number of principles to make sure that the strategy was robust and maintained the ecological integrity of the habitats and the landscape that we have. So first of all, throughout all of the development, we ensured that the landscape character, the catchment functions, and all of the ecosystem links that exist across the county were considered to make sure that the ecological functionality was never harmed or impacted on in terms of any of the interventions that were suggested. We also looked to focus on addressing the most significant impacts that arise from the pressures and challenges facing nature. So the local nature recovery strategy has little opportunity to really address some of the major pressures and challenges that face nature. But what it does have the opportunity to do is to address the impacts that come or result from these. So for instance, by looking to minimise or mitigate or compensate for those pressures and challenges. We then also wanted to make sure that our efforts were targeted to our most significant and important habitats. And this significance and importance was determined on both a local and a national basis. So for instance, the significance might be important at a national level because we particularly hold a big proportion of that particular habitat, either for the UK, for England, or even actually it could be Europe or globally. But also the significance could be held locally because it's a habitat that actually we have very limited resource of in the county, and therefore it's a habitat that we want to make sure is well provided for within the strategy, and the opportunities to increase it or extend it or create new habitats somewhere in the county were sort of identified and could be realised. But we didn't just concentrate on habitats that were threatened in extent. We also looked at what habitats were particularly at risk from degradation in quality or at risk from a changing climate. And it wasn't just about habitats. We made sure that consideration was given to the needs of threatened species, thinking about what habitats they particularly rely on, but also their role in the management and extension potentially of that habitat that they're associated with. We also wanted to look to support both local and national priorities and ambitions within what we were trying to do. And this wasn't just about looking at what ambitions there might be for nature, but also considering other opportunities that we could support, for instance, green and blue infrastructure ambitions within the county, and also wider environmental targets such as net zero. And we also wanted to not only identify the action and the delivery mechanisms needed to achieve those priorities, but then it was about focusing those to the areas of the county that were most in need of action or where delivery of that action would provide wide benefits. And finally, across all of the work, across all of the action we were looking to identify and to focus the strategy on, we wanted to make sure that opportunities for delivering nature-based solutions were maximised. So this just wasn't about sort of making sure that the real values and the real benefits that we get from a healthy natural environment were maximised, but of course that is important. But also what this also means is that where we have limited resources to deliver our nature recovery, if we look to couple that nature recovery with also providing a solution to an environmental challenge, that might open up other sources of funding that wouldn't necessarily be available otherwise. And right across the board, we also had the principle of participatory development. So the reason we wanted to do this is not just because it was something that was required, but we really wanted to make sure we wholeheartedly embrace this approach in the strategy's development, because this meant that the strategy would be based on the most up-to-date data and evidence. It would be developed with the input of the many experts we have right across the county. And also it would be informed by those with local knowledge and practical experience. So when you're developing a strategic landscape county-wide scale strategy, it's really important to have those who really understand what that means in terms of impacts and deliverability at the local level, to make sure that we did end up with a strategy that was not just ambitious, but was also practical and deliverable. And finally, because this has the potential to influence many different aspects, both in terms of planning, but also the direction of investment and resources and funding, we needed to make sure that this was a process that was transparent, that everyone that wanted to say had an opportunity to influence it, and they could see what decisions have been taken, and more importantly, why those decisions had been taken. And we were really blown away by the response to that call to arms that we put out to the county's stakeholders, with over 1,000 people engaged across the workshops that we had. And actually that input of 1,000 people is actually more than that, because we didn't capture numbers for every single engagement bit of work we did, and we really did get a huge amount of participation across many different events that we also attended but didn't host ourselves. And it's not just about numbers, as this shows. We had fabulous participation from a really wide number of different sectors contributing through the workshops. And also through the workshops, it wasn't just about the sectors, but it also was about the different affiliations. So we had just short of 300 different organisations, bodies, businesses, affiliations telling us what they wanted to see for nature recovery. And in addition to all this stakeholder input was the input that we had through the formal delivery of the structure, which was provided through a board and steering group, through a local planning authorities group that made sure that what we were proposing would work well with our local planning systems. We had dedicated advice from Natural England, the Environment Agency and Forestry Commission. And also the development of the strategy was very much steered, and in some cases had direct decisions taken by a number of advisory groups, which included those which assisted on the mapping, those that were fundamental to identifying our priority species, and also supporting work in relation to land management and land use, and the complex habitats that result in relation to freshwater and coastal. And we also had guidance in terms of our communications work as well. And owing to this exceptional amount of input, wherever I use the word we in terms of what the strategy is proposing, that really does mean the county. As I said, this is not a Kent County Council strategy, it's a strategy that we have developed for DEFRA on behalf of the county. And we are totally indebted to all of these contributions from partners and stakeholders for donating so much time, expertise and support through all the process. So I will pause there and just invite any questions that you may have specifically on the role of a local nature recovery strategy and the process that was undertaken to develop it. Chris, over to you to steer the discussion.
Well, we haven't got anything on Slido, and I'm just double checking that we haven't got any hands up at the minute. So, I mean, we're quite a small group, so if anybody wants to put their hand up and ask a question directly, that would be most welcome. Got Kathy.
Yeah. Yes. Right. So, can I speak?
Yes, please do. Yes.
Okay. So you know what I'm most worried about is offsetting, because I just see this as a way to make money, and that you have a very nasty business where you deal in units of biodiversity, and it's just a paper exercise. And I just wondered if you've got any ways to stop that, because I look at it as something very, very, very risky.
So in terms of biodiversity net gain, I will actually come to that in more detail in the third part of the presentation. So perhaps if we could pause that question to then, and then if you still feel that's not been sufficiently answered, come back in after that particular section.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else?
Yeah, could I say something?
Yes, please do.
Well, I just wonder what happens if you have a local planning authority which is determined to pass applications that do harm nature. As, you know, from what I've seen from the legal advice the developer that is working in our area has, which is if the harms to nature are outweighed by the gains to the economy, then it's okay. I know you have the biodiversity net gain, but we know that this is not really worth very much. So I mean, where I come from, there's a development of Betshanger, which apparently is the second most important lizard orchid colony in the UK, home to turtle doves, nightingales, and so on. And although this doesn't seem to be affected because the application has already been passed. And as I understand it, there's no element of compulsion with this, which means that it's taken into account. But okay, taken into account, lots of things are taken into account already. I mean, I think the maps are really great. I mean, I think what you're doing is really great, but lacking an element of compulsion, I can't see how it's going to really make a big change.
So the role that the local nature recovery strategy will play in local planning is something that we're still awaiting advice on from DEFRA and MHCLG. We were told that it was imminent. We were hoping that we would have that guidance in time for the public consultation, because obviously not just yourselves, but also planning authorities really want to understand what this means within the context of local planning. So in the absence of that guidance, I'm afraid I'm not able to answer your question. I think it's also important just to remember that the role of the strategy and what it actually can do is very much determined by DEFRA. So although we're producing and are almost like, if you like, at the face of the strategy, its ability and its effectiveness in terms of nature recovery really will come as a result of what mechanisms DEFRA and MHCLG put in place in terms of both how this informs local planning, but also how it directs investment and action to where it's needed. So it's very difficult for me to really comment on that particular matter. The one thing I do understand at the moment, certainly in the absence of any guidance, is that it's not expected that the maps or the strategy itself will be applied in any way retrospectively to planning decisions, to allocated sites or any other matters that sit within already established local plans or local plans that are already very well advanced in terms of their revision process.
I think Kathy just came in with an additional question, but Peter still, I think, has a follow-up one. But I think, to be fair, Kathy came in first.
Right. So thank you. Sorry to interrupt. And it's a point that I guess we all probably know, but I mean, if the whole point is DEFRA is siloed and nothing makes any sense. So you've got the county council, which this is the ELM scheme is under them. Oh, this LNR, the local nature recovery is under them, but then the local authority of the planners, so nothing works. I mean, the whole system is broken, and it's a joke, and I'm so sorry, and you know, but somebody's got to say that, and and now we've got NPPF that's being changed again. You know, bills baby bill, drill baby drill. It's a disaster. It's an absolute disaster. Anyway, not to worry. Hey, thanks.
I appreciate the frustrations that people have with the system and the like, but unfortunately that's not within our sphere of influence in as much as what we're presenting tonight. So perhaps if we can just keep our questions focused on the strategy itself. Otherwise we'll all end up going away thoroughly depressed if we're not already in that case, actually. Did you say, Chris, there was someone else to come back in with another?
Peter's sort of got another question, or perhaps it's the same one. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you gave a partial answer, which seemed to be, well, it depends on DEFRA and MHLG. So I mean, that seems to be, you know, the big question is okay, what are they going to do? I mean, it's nice to have, I mean, it's really great to have these maps. I mean, of course, I mean, maybe some future government may actually start to do something, and hopefully it won't be too late when they do. But so could you say more about what you're expecting from DEFRA and the Ministry of Housing, local government, and what exactly you expect them to do? I mean, presumably it's been set up by them, and so, they must have let you have some idea what they intend to do.
Not hugely. I will touch on it actually in the third part of the presentation. So perhaps if we could, again, just pause this discussion until I've gone through all of that, because that does present what we do know as from DEFRA in terms of how this will inform nature recovery. And then if that still hasn't answered your question, we can pick it up. But I am very limited on how much I can say because I'm not from DEFRA. We're not privy to pretty much anything of in regards of their thinking of how this works. So I am very limited, and I know that's frustrating, but it's equally frustrating for us, I can assure you, because we have very little knowledge as to what this strategy, how this strategy will in detail be implemented, the mechanisms that will allow that to happen, beyond what's being presented. But if we could perhaps pause this, wait to the end of the presentation when we'll have gone through in detail at the end how what we understand to date will be the delivery mechanisms for this, and perhaps we can pick it up at the end then if we have time. Okay, Chris, if there's nothing else burning in relation to the LNRS and the development process, I'll move on to the next phase of the presentation.
It's fine. Yeah, there's nothing on the slide. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, so what you will find when you actually look at the nature recovery strategy is that we have a strategy that is divided into two Word documents, if you like, two printed documents, plus the online mapping tool. So part one of the strategy sets essentially the context and provides a justification for everything that we're setting out in terms of what the priorities and actions are needed for nature recovery in Kent and Medway. So part one puts in place an overview of what we have in the county and looks at what's really significant, what areas are protected, and goes down into the detail of the sorts of things that we see in the county in terms of habitats and species. It then goes on to look at how that landscape has changed over the years, and what changes we've seen in terms of habitats and species, and also why we have seen those changes, what are the pressures, the threats and challenges that have resulted in these changes and will continue to influence nature in our county. And also that sets out the local and national strategic context, so those sorts of aspirations and ambitions that we're trying to look to support and deliver where we can through the local nature recovery strategy. And finally, it also looks at what opportunities there are for this nature recovery, and in particular, recognises the fact that we're not starting from a blank sheet of paper. There's a huge amount of action already being undertaken in the county, and the opportunities this presents to build on. And whilst all of this is really important and also very interesting in terms of what many of us hold dear in respect of the natural environment in Kent, I've decided not to focus in detail on what's presented in part one, but instead give you spend the time and give you a more detailed overview of what's presented in part two, which is essentially the real nuts and bolts of the strategy. So part two presents basically 7 elements, and those are the legislated, the required, the legal requirements of what a local nature recovery strategy has to present. So we were required to include all of these items as part of the local nature recovery strategy, and in some elements those were quite strictly defined by the regulations and guidance, and in other areas we had a little bit more autonomy. But obviously, because these are strategies that need to link up and join up across the boundaries, there was obviously quite a lot of direction from DEFRA in terms of how we should develop it to make sure that there was a consistent approach to what the strategies look like in practice. So the strategy, we were required to present in the strategy our principles and visions. We were required to set out what our priorities were and the potential measures that would sit alongside these. We were required to map these potential measures and then produce 3 strategic county-wide maps that identified our areas of particular importance, our areas that could become of importance, and also a local habitat map. And I will go through each of those elements now, starting with the principles and the vision. So the first 4 of these principles may well look familiar to them, because we have adopted Lawton's principles for nature recovery. So Lawton's principles are very much an accepted and tried and tested approach in terms of how we should frame nature recovery and land management if we are to recover nature. So these start with better, which is looking to improve the quality of what we already have and making sure that they are in a healthy and functioning state, and basically look after better what we already have in the county. And then we move on to increasing the size of these most valuable and important habitat sites within the county. So we can protect them better, or we can give them better resilience by making sure that those sites are bigger in extent and therefore less likely to be at risk from various different threats and impacts that come from, for instance, a changing climate, and also the impacts that come from human interventions. The next stage from that is, as well as increasing the size, we look to establish new nature-rich sites. And this is not only for the purposes of providing more space for nature, but also to deliver on the final principle of the Lawton principles, which is joined up. So making sure that all of our sites are joined up, because it is it's well known that what we do need to help nature be more resilient to climate change and also more resilient to human pressures, is that if we have a landscape that is better connected, is better joined up, then wildlife can move and respond to those pressures as they need to. They don't find that their migration, for example, is blocked. We then have built on the Lawton principles by also making sure that throughout everything we're doing, we're maximising the opportunities to work with nature and use these processes to tackle some of the socio-economic challenges within the county, and also put private landowners, land managers and farmers right in the centre of all this, and recognise the really integral role they have in supporting nature recovery. And what we have done is made sure that all of our potential measures are designed to deliver against one of these 6 principles. When we started reviewing the outcomes that the stakeholders told us they wanted to see for nature in the county, there were clear emerging high-level ambitions centred around broad habitat groupings within the county. So we used those to develop 10 ambitions that together make up the strategy's vision. And under each of these ambitions sit more specific priorities, and many of these priorities drill down to very specific habitat types. But the ambitions themselves focus initially not on habitats, but on some of those principles. So looking to increase the functional connectivity of high quality habitats, to increase the use of nature-based solutions, and as I say, put land management and land use right at the heart of nature recovery. And also to make sure that anything we're doing in terms of habitat management, restoration, extension or creation has species very much at the heart of its design. And then moving on to our habitat focused ambitions, we have ambitions in relation to restoring, connecting and extending our species rich grassland, safeguarding successional habitats from loss and damage. So often these habitats are overlooked in terms of the ecological importance that they play in many species life cycles. An ambition about bringing woodland trees and hedgerows under active management, and also increasing cover and connectivity across the county. We look to ensure that our freshwater habitats are clean, sufficient and healthy, and that their associated catchment functions are restored so that there is much more resilience within the freshwater network in the county. That we make sure that in all of this, we also provide for nature and environment. And that's not just about making sure that nature has space within our urban environments and can move around, that those spaces are connected, but also making sure that people who live in the urban environments have the opportunity to connect themselves with nature and see and benefit from the services it brings and the values it brings as well. And finally, as a county that has one of the longest coastlines in the country, we had to make sure there is an ambition for our coast. So we have an ambition that looks to secure high functioning and, where possible, as natural as possible and connected coastal habitats across the perimeters of the county. Now, that's a lot of words, and a lot of the words that we use in strategy talk often don't mean a huge amount to a lot of people. We're very good at putting together words, but not necessarily really conveying what it is that we're trying to achieve. So to support appreciation of what all these words really mean, we commissioned some artwork that was asked to illustrate all of these outcomes that our stakeholders had told us they wanted to see for nature. And arguably, this artwork illustrates our ambitions and our vision so much better than all of those bits of words, bits of text can. This artwork is joining us on the Consultation Roadshow as we travel around the county. So I would really encourage you to come out and see us, not to just talk about the strategy and nature in general, but also to take the opportunity to view these bits of art. But if you're not able to see us, you can also have a look at them online. So as I said, with those 10 ambitions, we have more detailed priorities that sit underneath each of them, and they outline the outcome that we want to see for nature in Kent and Medway. And many of these drill down to real detail and focus in some cases on specific habitat types. And alongside these, we also have a number of priority species that have been identified for action to focus on. So the priorities of the local nature recovery strategy were developed with stakeholders through a series of workshops. And then we looked to focus these on outcomes that tackled the county's most notable pressures and challenges and supported delivery of local and national ambition against our most significant, important and at-risk habitats. We have 52 priorities within the strategy, so it's not possible to present them all here today, but I encourage you to go online and have a look at our strategy document and have a look at the detail that they present. But these are just some examples of the priorities identified under the ambitions of connectivity, nature-based solutions, land management. We have an example here for species-rich grassland, in on a particular habitat, in this case chalk grasslands, and likewise for our successional habitats, looking at that early successional habitat that's so important for many of our priority species. We also have ambitions here, we also have priorities here that come under our woodland trees and hedgerows. So in this case, particularly focusing on ancient woodlands and veteran trees. For freshwater, we have a particular focus in this particular example for a priority for chalk streams, a priority that relates to addressing habitat fragmentation in our urban environments. And finally, the example here for our coastal ambition is focusing on the coastal chalk reefs and chalk cliffs that we have around the coast. As I said, we also identified a number of priority species on which action would be focused. This followed guidance or followed a process that was provided to us by Natural England, and that basically, first of all, gave us some criteria that would identify within the county what rare, threatened and significant species, as defined by Natural England, we had within the county. Our record showed that we had over 1,500 rare, threatened and significant species within the county, just demonstrating how important our county is in this regard. But we did have to focus these down, and we went down to the identification of 141 priority species. So these 141 species represent all the taxa that are rare and threatened species long list illustrated we had. And these were selected, these 141 species were selected not just on the basis of need and urgency for themselves, but also in consideration of whether action for them would also support the recovery of the other vulnerable species that were associated with the same habitat assemblage. And what also is identified in a strategy is for each of those priority species, what measures are required to support their recovery. And those 141 species were identified through a task and a technical advisory group of over 30 species specialists that we have in the county, and we really are incredibly grateful for all the expertise that they allowed us to put in and create a short list of 140 odd priority species that we feel we can be comfortable is robust and really representative of what we need to do for species conservation in the county. But because we do end up with just over 1,300 of our rare and threatened species not included in this list, we also include an overarching strategy which makes sure that consideration is given to all of our threatened and vulnerable species within the county when any nature recovery habitat-based action is designed. So we have these 52 priorities, and under the 52 priorities are a number of potential measures. Potential measures are essentially the proposed action that will deliver against that priority. And we're also required to target these to where they will deliver the greatest gains and benefits and essentially map these. So as you can imagine, with 52 priorities and sort of between 3 and 4 or 5 potential measures per priority, I'm certainly not going to take you through all of the potential measures, but instead here I'm just going to demonstrate what you will see when you look at the strategy in respect of the priority and the potential measures that are presented. So within the strategy, every priority has its potential measures listed, and these are identified against which of the strategy principles they relate to. So in the case here, I have an example that is for priority GL2, which relates to coastal and floodplain grazing marsh. And we have potential measures which relate to the delivery of better, relate to the delivery of more, and relate to the delivery of connected. In some instances, there are a number of supporting measures that are also needed, which we have presented in the document. This example doesn't actually have any of these supporting measures, but examples from other priorities are just provided here to give you an example, to give you an indication of the sorts of things that are included under supporting measures. Effectively, what we have, supporting measures are actually something that sit outside the scope, the delivery framework, the scope of the local nature recovery strategy, because we were required to only focus on potential measures that related to either habitats, actions on habitats or actions on species. However, when we discussed all of our potential measures and the priorities with our stakeholders, it was really clear that there were a number of supporting measures that were really fundamental to the successful achievement of the priorities. And so we decided it was important to include them alongside the relevant priority, because it was important to set out what we as a county may need to work on to coordinate together to ensure success of that priority. But they do, as I say, sit outside of the delivery scope of the LNRS. Also sitting outside the scope of the local nature recovery strategy, but something we have also included again, is the priority area, is the identified evidence and data needs that has been identified during the course of the strategy's development. So again, these aren't related and won't be delivered as a result of the local nature recovery strategy, but it's really important to recognise these, particularly as the majority of these data and evidence needs were identified as a result of the mapping work, and we found that there was certain information or evidence that we didn't have that would have enabled us to much better target that potential measure to where it was needed. So in terms of the forthcoming review and revision of the strategy, it will be really important to try and address these gaps in data and evidence to make sure that next time round our strategy can be even more robust and even more targeted to where we want to see action happening. And finally, when you look at the table for each priority, you will also see all of the priority species that have been identified associated with that particular habitat type. When you look at the measures table, if there are any potential measures that have a reference number, so in the case here we have 3 measures that have a reference number of GL 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3, anything with a reference number indicates that that potential measure has been mapped, and that map can be viewed online by selecting the map with that same reference number. So the next thing that we had to do is, once we had identified the potential measures, we're then required to map them and target them to where they would deliver the best gains, the widest benefits, and also look to maximise opportunities for nature-based solutions. More detail on how we went about this mapping is provided in the strategy, and in particular what data and evidence was used to inform those. But in brief, we went about this first of all by looking at what data and evidence we did have that would help us to inform and define the mapping of each potential measure. And this determined whether there was sufficient information to enable that action to be targeted to where it was most needed or where action would be most beneficial. And what the result of that was that not all of the measures could be mapped because that data or knowledge was insufficient. It was also the case that perhaps there just wasn't any data or evidence that we could use to map, or the appropriate mapping approach was too costly or time consuming within the scope of the current local nature recovery strategy development. However, what happened as a result of this initial approach was it meant that by only mapping those measures that could be sufficiently refined to then devise our areas that could become of importance for biodiversity, so basically the opportunity areas for nature recovery, this meant that some areas of the county appeared from the mapping to have no potential or importance for nature recovery. And this was certainly not the case, and instead just represented areas where either measures largely related to improving management or putting in place management, and therefore there was little on which to prioritise one area over another, because management provides benefits wherever it's placed, or it was just that the data that was available wasn't sufficiently refined to enable that required targeting of the mapping. But really understandably, when the stakeholders looked at this, they viewed this as problematic, and they felt that it misrepresented the actual value of these areas to nature recovery. So in consideration of this, we decided to take the approach to where we could map a measure, we would map it, even if that could only be mapped to the extent of basing that opportunity on existence of habitat type or the potential for that habitat type. So in some cases, this did result in mapped potential measures that had very broad and county-wide coverage, but it did at least show that we recognised that there were opportunities for that potential measure across the county, and showed where opportunities for that potential measure were available. And we also then took that potential measures mapping and we reviewed it and refined it with our stakeholders and partners. And this was a really important part of the process because it allowed us to ground truth what was essentially a desk-based mapping approach. And it also allowed us, with stakeholders' input, to look where we could actually focus and target it based on their local knowledge, and also allowed us to make sure that where we had suggested actions could occur, that this did consider the deliverability and went back to that need to make sure that what we were suggesting in the strategy was indeed practical. We then also took the opportunity to look at how we might further refine those by considering opportunities to address wider environmental challenges by nature-based solutions. So that might have included where a particular habitat restoration or extension or even creation also provided the opportunity to say, for instance, deliver flood management, that you could then potentially cite that potential measure in areas where there were known high flood risk issues. And also in terms of other wider benefits, we looked at how we could help to address wider benefits and address some of those other ambitions that related to, say, for instance, blue and green infrastructure or improving access. So where we, again, were looking at the creation or extension of habitats, and that habitat was not particularly vulnerable to disturbance from recreation, then we looked at whether that particular extension or creation could be targeted to areas where there might be already low access to green space, or there might be existing sort of areas of health deprivation, low health and other sort of risks to health that perhaps increasing access to green space could support. So that enabled us to provide further refinement and target where particular measures could be directed to and allow those wider benefits also to be realised. So within the strategy, you will only see measures that are grouped per the priority. So you won't see the mapping for each individual potential measure, just simply because there are so many maps, and also arguably they don't give you much value on a landscape, on a sort of a county scale looking at them. So what you will find is basically a map that shows all of the opportunities for all of the potential measures that relate to a particular priority. And in most cases that relates to a a specific habitat type. So in this instance here, you have all the potential measures, all the opportunities for delivering those potential measures for coastal and floodplain grazing marsh. What you need to do if you want to look at the individual measures is to look at the online mapping tool. And in this case, we're sticking with our floodplain grazing marsh and looking at our coastal floodplain grazing marsh rather, and looking at the particular potential measure of delivering that to support our important grazing marsh flora and fauna and reducing recreational disturbance. So the manner in which we approached that and delivered that results in this this map that looks here, which identifies where the particular opportunities for the delivery of that potential measure exist. And I'll go into a bit more detail and demonstrate how you can really look at those through the online tool in the final part of the session. So that then brings us to the 3 strategic maps that we were required to prepare for the local nature recovery strategy. The first is the area of particular importance for biodiversity, and this maps to very strict requirements or regulations. So we were only allowed to include certain elements within this map as directed by DEFRA. And this focuses on our nationally designated sites, our local wildlife sites, our local nature reserves, and also irreplaceable habitats as defined by Biodiversity Net Gain. So in Kent, that relates to ancient woodland, ancient trees, coastal sand dunes, spartina swards, and lowland fens. And essentially, the explanation for this map is this is effectively the sites that we have within the county that are offered or afforded some manner of protection or management that results from either its designation, the protection legislation, or local planning policy. We then were required to present or develop a map that identified areas that could become of particular importance for biodiversity. This essentially is our mapped opportunity and target areas. And although there were requirements as to what we had to do in respect to this map, we had a little autonomy ourselves as to how we actually developed it. So the foundation of the ACIB is to look at what our mapped potential measures tell us. Now, obviously, because we chose to map all of our potential measures, whether or not we were able to refine them or not, we were not able to base the areas that could become of particular importance for biodiversity on all of the potential measures, because they didn't allow us to be targeted sufficiently. So the first stage of mapping these areas that could become of particular importance for biodiversity was to exclude any measures that weren't sufficiently refined. And these largely excluded measures that did not focus on the restoration, creation or connection. And we feel that this is a correct approach, because our understanding of it is many of the funding mechanisms that will result, and also other investment opportunities that might result from Biodiversity Net Gain, all of those relate to restoring, creating and connecting. They don't relate to putting in place management. So we feel that taking this approach of excluding those areas doesn't unfairly discriminate certain areas of the county from funding. We then looked to refine these further by really delving down, really drilling down to those wider environmental challenges and other benefits that that nature can provide. And the final sort of drill down in terms of refinement was delivered through applying connectivity modelling. So this connectivity modelling refined the area further by placing priority on looking at areas where we have low species flow, where there are particular bottlenecks to connectivity, and areas where buffering or linking of our existing areas of particular importance were required. And the rationale for focusing the last part of the refinement on this is, if you think of the 4 principles of Launton of better, bigger, more and joined up, and think of them as a hierarchy, that by focusing on the better, bigger and more, and focusing that action in areas where we know that there are sort of issues for connectivity, we would deliver that ultimate ambition of making sure our landscape was more joined up. this map here is purely to illustrate why we needed to target and why we had to remove some of the mapped potential measures that didn't allow us to do that. So this map illustrates all of the mapped potential measures, and what this shows is pretty much a blanket coverage across the whole of the county. And this doesn't tell us anything surprising. It really shows us what we already know, is that everywhere obviously has the potential to be an important area for nature. But the requirements of the local nature recovery strategy development required us to be more focused in what we mapped for our areas that could become of particular importance for biodiversity. And it's that word particular that means that we focus and drill down. So everywhere is important, and arguably when you look at the map potential measures, you will see just how important various areas of the county are for particular potential measures. But in terms of identifying these areas, we had to really target it down, and that resulted in our areas that could become of particular importance for biodiversity map looking like so, and that provides around 38% coverage of the county for effectively our target areas for nature recovery. Finally, what we have is the local habitat map. This was the final map that we were required to develop under the strategy. And this essentially combines our areas of particular importance for biodiversity and our areas that could become of importance for biodiversity. And that creates the local habitat map. And the purpose of the local habitat map is to indicate our areas of strategic significance, and what that specifically means in terms of nature recovery action and delivery, I will explain in the final part of the session when we look at how the strategy and its maps are used to inform nature recovery. But I will pause just there for any questions. Chris,
We've got
does
one
anyone
from
have your
Peter
hands up?
there.
Peter.
Yeah, I mean, I was very interested. You talk about specific sites, but I just wondered about conurbanization. Which doesn't seem to be specific sites, but seems to be the gradual encroachment and the expansion of settlements and ribbon development and so on. Is that something that's relevant?
Yeah,
so you're not talking about specific sites, but you're talking about the overall picture.
Yes, so we're identifying broad areas where action for nature should be targeted, or where specifically our potential measures should be targeted. In terms of effectively urban sprawl and sort of the extension and increase of urban areas on sort of more natural areas, that's something that sits with local planning to manage and essentially ensure that it's delivered in a sustainable way. What we have got within the strategy is our priorities that relate to urban environments, and what we have done there is put in place priorities and associated potential measures that we hope will ensure in time that where this inevitable increase in urban areas happens, because we have an increase in population that has to be provided for, where development does happen, that it is more mindful and more considerate of making sure that there is space for nature within those developments, not just, again, like I say, for the purposes of nature itself, but also because the majority of people live in urban areas, and we don't want them to be disconnected from nature. And that's also not just about providing spaces, but also building in that connectivity, so that if a development is going in, it considers what impact it's had to for wildlife movement, and ensures that that wildlife movement is not impeded as a result of the said development going in.
Kathy just came in, then Peter again.
Kathy?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, so this is the point I made at the workshop, which is the fundamentally the whole thing is very flawed, in that you need to think about your blue infrastructure. Okay, so water is key. And as you know, my interest is Stodmarsh in particular, which is international site, and the massive degradation of it. But so that is the problem. And you know, and so we can, it's all very well saying we're going to look at land and we're going to have our little bits that we're going to try and make nice. But the fact is you can't get away from the pollution of the water, and water moves everywhere. You can't fragment it and think, oh, we're going to be okay, because if we're constantly centered on land. And I am very worried about that. I don't see the blue infrastructure plan at all.
So all of the freshwater section is actually the largest section in the strategy, and includes the biggest number of priorities and the largest number of potential measures. And actually, many of the measures have not been mapped because they are applicable across. Because they are applicable everywhere. So
yeah, that's not good enough. So we need to. So we're talking about an international Ramsar site. Okay, one of the in the world that has been absolutely trashed, and you know, and just because the water has been privatized and not regulated, and it's been trashed, and we're not going to, you know, we have to, and there are very specific things that need to be done about preserving special sites of water. That's you know.
Well, I think so that therein lies sort of the answer really to your query, is the fact that the local nature recovery strategy, first of all, I mean, like I said right at the beginning, there are pressures and challenges on our natural environment that are just outside the scope of something at a local level to deal with. You are not wrong when you say that we need stricter regulations and protections of our waterways, but the local nature recovery strategy is not about protection, it's about directing action. So all we are able to do,
directing the action by, when you're coming into a site of special scientific interest, is we put in the mitigation coming up to it. Okay, that's super important. So there's a heck of a lot of protection of special water sites that could be done that I don't see being done. That's the point. And the planning, we cannot let that be siloed, because when you plan, you have greater runoff. That's not being, and everything impacts everything. But water is key. Water is the root of everything. And with this sort of blinkered looking at just little pockets of land, you're going completely wrong. I know it's not your fault, okay, and I know you're doing your best, but it's really frustrating. And it isn't the case that, oh, it's everywhere. It is that we should be targeting, and sometimes we do, to be fair, but not enough.
well, I mean, like I say, so where we believe there is a value in targeting it, then we have, and where we've had the evidence. I mean, we can only target where we've got the information that allows us to do it. If you feel there's a potential,
I tried to give you information. I did try to give you information, and I don't think that's really sort of percolated down. But there we are. Yeah. Anyway, not to worry.
well, I mean, obviously you're more than welcome to sort of speak to us. I mean, perhaps we have a pop-up in one of the libraries in, I think you're Thanet way, aren't you? So we have a pop-up in one of the libraries in Thanet. Oh, is it Canterbury, is it? Oh, okay, sorry.
I'm talking Canterbury, I'm talking Canterbury, I'm talking chalk streams, the Stour, and
so
yeah.
Yeah, we have quite a lot of pop-up events in Canterbury. Sorry, I thought you were Thanet because I remember you from our Thanet workshop.
Yeah, exactly.
So
I was talking to Thanet people. I mean, it's everybody's in this together. I mean, it's not.
Yeah.
That's the thing that I really hate more than anything else, is because like water is everywhere. Water connects. You know, it's a whole cycle. You know, it's ridiculous to say, oh, we're going to have this little parcel of land and everything's going to be fine. You know, that's not right. So you know, I'm 100% behind Thanet. I'm 100% behind everybody.
Yeah, sorry. The reason I'm talking about areas is just to find you your closest session. So yeah, if you have a look on our website, we actually have quite a lot of opportunities for you to come in to one of our consultation sessions in Thanet actually, and you can come and explain. I mean, the only thing that we've had to do is we can only base the mapping on publicly held or available data and evidence. Unfortunately, largely speaking, it can't be done on anecdotal evidence. So that might be.
I can get people, because we've got the University of Kent, we've got environmental people from there. So I mean, I don't know why they haven't done more, to be honest. But I think one of the biggest problems we've had is that people aren't aware of these meetings. It just hasn't sort of gone through to all of the right people.
University of Kent were actually on our data evidence and mapping technical advisory group. So I'm sure if they had data that would have been relevant or could have been used.
Not necessarily, because not necessarily, because the academics aren't necessarily the actual. Well, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, don't let me distract you.
We also had, just to reassure as well in terms of the mapping. So the mapping was done by the South East Rivers Trust, who I don't think you could get a bigger advocate for the health of, in terms of a non-governmental organisation, who you couldn't get a bigger advocate or champion for the importance of not just the health of our rivers, but considering them on a catchment basis. And all of the strategy has been reviewed and inputted to by all of the catchment partnerships as well. So I feel that within the scope of the strategy and what it's able to do, I do think that we have represented the catchments as best as possible.
Because you've got the catchment area, and that should be central to planning, because that's all European stuff that we've got that somehow we silo, and in other places it isn't. And you've also got the river basin plan. Okay, that's super important. So we've got the catchment, because you got the water coming down from the catchment into Stodmarsh, where it's all massively polluted, but as Ramsar, and then you've got the basin, the River Valley Basin, which is the Stour coming through and the vineyards, and that's all going to flood, and that's all going to be wrecked. And it's just nothing, as I said before. I mean, nothing joins up, but it's anyway. You know that's just what it is. Yeah.
Okay. No, that's fine. But yes, please do, feel free to come down to one of our Canterbury sessions if you do feel that there's particular aspects of the mapping that could be mapped if there is sort of publicly available data that allows that to be done. So I'm very conscious of the time. It's 7:10, which does mean that we're going to struggle to give everyone a break. So apologies for that, but please feel free, if you need to step away from your screens. We are recording it, so if you do need to step away, you won't miss anything. I do feel like we need to press on, but Chris, are there any more hands up or any burning points that want to be made?
Peter had an additional question. You're on mute, I think.
Yeah, I think my question is actually quite a brief one. In reality, decisions are made by planning committees and planning officers, and quite often they make very loose planning conditions. And you can see that, for example, there's a Lost Nature report which points this out. So what I wonder is what degrees of powers you will have. I mean, if they take things into account, that doesn't really mean a very great deal. I mean, talking about water, for example, the Stour Inland Drainage Board, which is going to review the kind of dumping of treated chlorinated water from the surf lagoon that's going to be constructed at Betts Hanger Park, supposedly has very few powers actually to actually intervene. So I think the reality of the situation is about planning committees and planning officers, and to some degree local plans and NPPF. And so I just wonder what powers you have.
Well, I think this goes back to the point that that we don't have any powers, because we are KCC and this is the local nature recovery strategy, and the powers come from DEFRA. And as I said, I'll touch on this briefly in the next section. But it's really, I share your frustrations, and I completely understand your frustrations at the different failures within the planning system when it comes to protecting and conserving our natural environment. But I just feel that it's not within the scope of this discussion or the strategy to address really. I think there is currently a consultation going in respect of nature recovery within the planning system, and I would recommend that if you haven't already, that you submit your thoughts to that, because that's really where those sorts of changes will be embedded, rather than anything that I can do or say right now. So I would certainly recommend, if you haven't done already, to have a look at those. And also, you know, in terms of I'll come to this in a minute, but we have had great engagement from our local planning authorities. They are keen to see this work at the local planning level. Of course, it will take time for it to come through, because, you know, there's not a requirement, and they certainly they would not be able to retrospectively apply the local nature recovery strategy to existing local plans. But as local plans are revised, and also obviously we potentially might have devolution, and therefore what will happen in respect of local plans there, that it might be that we see a revision of the local plans much quicker than perhaps are currently scheduled for, as we move to potentially devolved administrations. That might present an opportunity to see the local nature recovery embedded sooner than we might have expected. But what that take account means is something that we have been pressing for DEFRA and MHCLG for some time now, and we really, I can't comment beyond what I know, which is basically that we will be expected to we're expecting guidance shortly. And also that, as we understand it, there won't be any requirement for it to be retrospectively applied. So the impact or the influence it have will only come in as new plans are established. I suppose the one thing that also does possibly add some weight that we do kind of know of, but we that might sort of shed some light, is that all public bodies have an enhanced biodiversity duty now, which means that on a 5-year basis, they need to show what they have done to consider nature recovery and what they have put in place to action and support nature recovery. So one of the ways they could arguably sort of, I hesitate to use the word readily is probably a better word. One of the ways they could readily demonstrate that is by showing how they have wholeheartedly embedded the local nature recovery strategy into their local plans, and how they have potentially used that to ensure that some of our most vulnerable and important sites are safeguarded from development. There is no requirement that that's how they do it, but that is a potential way in which they could demonstrate how they have met their biodiversity duty. So again, I mean, the other way is to, you know, I could suggest that you speak to your local planning authority and ask them what they have done to consider nature recovery in their area, and what they have proposed to do to support nature recovery, because that is a duty that they're now required to meet. But I think now, if it's okay with everyone, we'll move on to the final session, because I have a feeling there might be some further questions on that. And as much as I love promoting what we're trying to do with the strategy and talking to you all, I doubt any of us want to be here till midnight tonight. So we'll crack on, and hopefully the next section will go some way to answer some of your questions. And obviously we will take further questions if it doesn't. So the final session is to look at how the local nature recovery how the local nature recovery strategy will influence and inform nature recovery within the county as we understand it, and how the mapping that has been created for the strategy will help support that. So that, as we understand it, is a really important sort of subtext to what I'm about to say. So as you may have gathered, there has been limited information provided to us, limited official guidance presented as to how any of the local nature recovery strategy will actually sort of be delivered. So there's lots of, it may do this and it may do that, but the actual mechanisms by which that will happen, so that sort of what does that take account of in local planning mean, that hasn't been provided yet. So what I present here is as best as we know and understand it, and where I am making a few assumptions, I will point that out so that I'm not leading you up a garden path without telling you so. So essentially, the mapping is a really important part of the strategy because it spatially frames everything that we're trying to do. And what we have done is created this online mapping tool. And the one that you see currently for the consultation has been just produced for the consultation. Our intention is to develop a much more sophisticated and sort of user-friendly experience that allows you to really, at a click of a button, see what actually is proposed on a particular area you're interested in. The reason we haven't done that for this consultation is just simply because building such a tool is expensive in terms of both time and cost, and we have limited of both for developing the tool. So we didn't want to develop a all singing or dancing tool until we actually come to the published part of the strategy, because hopefully by then we will have some answers to these really fundamental questions that you are all correctly identifying this evening. So we're not actually inviting, as part of the consultation, any comments on the mapping tool itself, but we certainly will be over the next 6 months going out to the users of the map to try and understand how you would like to use it and how we can support that through what we provide once the strategy is published. So when you first launch the mapping tool, you'll get the pop-up that's shown, and you just read through it all and then click the OK button. Just to highlight one of the items that is sort of included in the information that you see when you first launch the map, and that is that because of the amount of data available to view in the platform, because there is so much of it, some of the layers may take a while to load. It can be sort of 30 seconds or so for all the layers to load. So please do be patient, and the different speeds really does depend on your own computer specification and also internet speeds. If it goes beyond 2 minutes, that's probably something has gone wrong. So please refresh the page. And if you do find you routinely have troubles loading the layers, please give us a bell. But to date, we haven't had any issues. But because it can take a bit of a time to load, I'm not going to do a live demonstration this evening. I'm just going to use some screenshots. So like I say, you click the OK button and you'll be brought to the basic mapping interface. What you do is you click on the mapping layers menu button up the top. And when you've clicked that, you'll be presented with a number of options. So the first options here, just to talk you through, are about how you view the map. So first of all, you can select your preferred baseline map. So this can be street map, which is what's currently shown here, or you could have grayscale, or you can look at it through satellite imagery. And the default for this is the street map view. You can also select whether you view the map with the district boundaries, the district labels, and whether you have the rivers network presented as well. And again, the default is for all of those layers to be provided, all of them to be switched on. And should you choose to, depending on which ones you want and which ones you don't, you can just click on and off depending on what you want to see. On the left-hand side of the screen are a couple of other functions. So you have here a little icon that's a table, and that will bring up information on all of the potential measures. So what you will find when you click on the various different habitat groupings there, or priority groupings, is that you only have the reference number. So the reason there's only the reference number at this stage is simply because most of our potential measures are quite wordy. And if we included all of the potential measures details, then that menus bar at the side would go on for pages and pages, and you'd be having to scroll through a lot before you actually got to the measure you want. So for the time being, for this more simple platform, for the sake of the consultation, all you have is the potential measures reference number. But at any point, you can find out what that potential measure reference relates to by clicking on that table on the left-hand side. And you also have on the left-hand side the zoom in and out function, which allows you to look at it at a greater or lesser scale. So as I said, if you want to know what a potential measures reference number relates to, you click the tables button and it'll bring up this table on the screen. So in the potential measure reference box indicated here, you would enter the particular reference number that you're interested in. and that will bring up all the detail that you need. So it will tell you what the actual potential measure is, whether it was used as one of the baseline maps for the areas that could become of importance for biodiversity, and also a very basic overview in terms of what the method was used to map that. But if you do want a more detailed explanation and also the data and evidence that was used to inform that, then you can get that from the strategy appendices. But what this means is that if you are looking at the map and you want to know what a particular measure is, you don't need to flip between the sort of the Word document of the strategy and the online map. You can get everything you should need from this mapping table. So in terms of how you might use this, so as I said, one of the purposes of the strategy is to direct action for nature recovery. The strategy proposes an action and then maps that where it could be delivered. So in some areas, these might be wide-ranging areas covering a big chunk of the county, and in others where we've been able to be more specific in the mapping, they are focused on a more local level. But in all cases, the mapped areas are indicative. So it's not suggesting that it has to happen. It's just suggesting that this is on the basis of the mapping that we've done and of our understanding of the area. This is where we believe this potential measure could be delivered, and where we've been able to refine it by delivering it at that particular place will offer the greatest benefits. We have mapped some of our management measures where we've been able to in terms of the data, but quite often in the case it has been mapped where that management may most be needed or result in the greatest gains. But it's really important to remember that the introduction of any management, as long as it's appropriate, so that's the right management in the right place at the right time for the right reasons, introducing that anywhere will deliver benefits. So just because it's not mapped doesn't mean that it's not that it won't deliver benefits. It just has not been defined as sort of targeted need for that management at that level. Similarly, the strategic nature of the document means that where we have looked at measures, they may not be relevant or appropriate when considered in detail at the local level. So we might have identified that a particular measure is for a particular location, but when someone goes out onto site, they realise that that is just not, it's not going to work, it's not appropriate, because we have done this. Obviously, we can't go and ground truth and site assess every single location for the whole of the county. So that's why it's really important to remember that this mapping of the measures is indicative. And also it's important to remember that we have mapped this on the basis of a strategic value at a county level. So by mapping that at a county level, it can mean that when you look at it at a local level, that measure has not been mapped at the very localised level. And again, that does not mean that that action is not applicable. It just means that its value has not been considered to be strategically significant when considered at the county scale. And because we have used this desk-based approach, it means that, like I say, the mapping's theoretical. It means that the mapping's indicative and it's not based on actual known site conditions. So in all cases, wherever a potential measure has been indicated, has been mapped, there still is the requirement to undertake a site assessment to make sure that it is appropriate. And also any mapped measurement does not preclude any required permissions or prerequisites that would be normally required when undertaking that sort of action on that sort of habitat. And likewise, where a map indicates an action should occur, it does not dictate that action, nor does it instruct their implementation. It's simply there as a guide for landowners and managers on how they could use or manage the land or approach their operations in a way that could support the recovery of nature. So you might want to therefore look at where a particular habitat or a particular measure has been identified and use the map to do it. So you may already know what particular measure you're interested in, because it could be that you've looked through the strategy and you thought, oh, that I like the look of that measure. That looks really interesting. I wonder where they've mapped it. I wonder if they've mapped it in my local area. So in that case, you would simply just take that mapping reference and go straight to the mapping layers tool. But it may also be that you don't know the reference number. And if that is the case, if you just want to look for a priority or measure that relates to a specific habitat type you're interested in, you can use the table search function to do this. So the way in which you would approach this is you would, in the box here where the arrow points, you would enter the habitat type you're interested in. So in this case, it's I've put in grazing marsh. And when you enter that in, it will then bring up all of the potential measures that have been mapped that relate to that particular habitat type. So you can see here that within the extent of all the mapped potential measures, we have 3 potential measures that relate to grazing marsh. So what you would do is note those reference numbers. You either note just the one if you're interested in it, or if you're interested in all of them, you just note down the ones that you're interested in viewing and then head to the mapping. So you pull down the mapping layers and you select the particular potential measure you're interested in. So I've selected here GL 2.2, and everything that is coloured blue along the map, that indicates where that potential measure has the opportunity for delivering that potential measure has been identified to exist. Now you can select more than one potential measure at a time, but the map currently does not distinguish between the potential measures. So all you will see is all the opportunities for all of those potential measures across the county. So if you're interested in just one particular potential measure and where that should be, then you're best off looking at them on an individual basis. And as I said, there is the zoom in and out function, and it does go in even closer than this, but you can zoom in and out and really look to where those potential measures have been mapped within the area that you're interested in. So that's how the maps might be used to inform specific action for nature recovery. But one of the things I also talked about is the fact that the local habitat map, which is the areas that could become of importance for biodiversity and the areas of existing importance for biodiversity, the local habitat map indicates areas of strategic significance. And there's ways in which this strategic significance might be used to inform various things within the county. So the first part of it will be potentially that if a potential measure falls within an area that could become of particular importance for biodiversity, this indicates that it's a new action, a potential measure that will offer of particular importance for nature recovery. So if land falls in this area and the action aligns with the potential measures that have been identified for the area, we envisage that this may be classed as strategically significant for any grant, funding and investment scheme, using this as an indicator. So you could see how that strategic significance might be used, as I said, to direct funding or investment or grants to where it's most needed in the county by using the areas of strategic significance. So that's how we envisage how it could be. That's sort of our assumption of how it could be used. And DEFRA has told us, have advised us that the local nature recovery strategy will be used to provide information to farmers and land managements with regards to what countryside stewardship or sustainable farming incentive options might be most appropriate for their land. And collectively, where they group landowners together to sort of provide landscape scale restoration, that again, it would help landowners to collectively shape what the nature recovery priorities for their area would be and what are the potential measures that would deliver on those. It might also identify opportunities for landscape recovery project proposals and provide evidence that would support any application and project development. And finally, it can help government when considering applications for funding for specific nature recovery activities by acting as a criteria for the application. So that would be where that instance that I've just suggested is that perhaps they might make the criteria that it needs to be a potential measure that features within the local nature recovery strategy, and it needs to also that potential measure not only needs to be something that's been identified as required, but it also needs to be directed in an area that has been classed as strategically significant for nature recovery in Kent and Medway. One area that we've got a bit more understanding of, but still limited understanding of how the areas of strategic significance will be used is in reference or in relation to biodiversity net gain. So biodiversity net gain is a mandatory requirement that aims to make sure that development has a measurably positive impact on biodiversity, and that gain is calculated through the use of a standardized calculation tool, a metric, which identifies the biodiversity of the value of the land that's to be lost, and then the value of the biodiversity that will be gained by the interventions that the development or the developer puts in place to provide that 10% gain of biodiversity. So in that metric, in that calculator, there is a strategic significance multiplier, and that strategic significance multiplier relates to the local habitat map and the potential measures that fall within it. So you can see that through the requirement of development to give back 10% more biodiversity that it takes away, that does offer some potential for improving things for nature. But what the strategic significance multiplier means is it will be more meaningful in terms of nature recovery if the gains are not only situated in areas of greatest need, but also deliver on the action required. So therefore, the guidance that relates to the biodiversity net gain metric states that high strategic significance will be applied when the habitat parcel is located in an area proposed to help deliver the local nature recovery strategy priorities, so i.e. the local habitat map, and the intervention is consistent with the potential measures that have been proposed for that location. So hopefully that gives you an understanding of how our maps can actually make that biodiversity net gain requirement that is now placed on development more than just a tick box exercise. It actually can assist in making sure that those gains, and I know that Kathy referred to offsetting, and effectively biodiversity net gain could be viewed as an offsetting mechanism. But what it will mean is it's not just a tick box to say we've given 10% back, but it's an opportunity to make sure that that 10% actually really contributes to what we need in terms of nature recovery in the county. I think it's important to also understand what the areas of strategic significance don't mean. So the areas that could become of importance for biodiversity, so areas that currently aren't offered any formal protection but have been identified as areas of opportunity for nature recovery, these do not indicate areas where development should be excluded, and they do not dictate action or place limitation on how the land should be used. So they should not be seen as a sort of like an indicator of prevention for development. And because we don't have this guidance, I feel like a bit of a broken record over the local planning and role of local nature recovery strategies in local planning, because I feel like I've said this at every single briefing, because everyone is really understandably really wants to know what this take account means. But because we don't have that guidance yet, we are working on the understanding and expectations that local plans and policies will not be revised in reference to the strategy. But what we have been told is where there are local plans and policies already in place, that when that plan and policy is being applied, that there should be some consideration of that local nature recovery strategy in the application of that. But again, we don't know what that take account means, so apologies for not being able to expand on that. But what we will see in time is that as local plans are revised and updated, the local habitat map and its areas of strategic significance will be an important source of spatial information that will be used to inform land use planning and ensure that nature and opportunities for its recovery is considered. And the fact that it is a statutory requirement to take account of this local nature recovery strategy, and we do have that associated enhanced biodiversity duty for local planning authorities, it will mean that there is a definite requirement and need and role for planning authorities to look at these strategies, and it for sure does place a better opportunity for all of this to be embedded in local plans than we have previously had. It's perhaps without the detail that we need, we don't know quite how good that is, but it's certainly better than we have had previously. So in terms of how you use the online mapping tool to understand the areas of strategic significance, you first would click on both the areas that could become of importance for biodiversity and areas of particular importance for biodiversity. And then basically anything that shows up on the map in yellow or on the map in green can be considered the local habitat map for Kent and Medway, and any coloured area, any green or yellow area, denotes the areas of strategic significance for the county. So whilst you might want to see that, probably what's more useful and of more interest is whether that area of strategic significance falls in an area that you're interested in, and even more so whether a potential measure that you would like to see delivered falls within that area of strategic significance. Because as I said, that can, for the purposes of biodiversity net gain, can mean that your biodiversity net gain has more value because it's being delivered in an area that has been identified as really important for nature and is delivering on an action that has been identified as needed for nature recovery. Or it could be that the areas of strategic significance have been defined as an area where certain funding bodies want to see action targeted to those areas. So you're likely to want to look at it from that perspective of understanding where a potential measure falls within that area of strategic significance. So the way in which you would do this is you would first of all select the potential measure, the specific potential measure you're interested in. And then you would select both areas that could become of importance for biodiversity and areas of particular importance for biodiversity. And this would bring up this multicoloured map that you see before you. And obviously there'd probably be some value here also in scanning down to the particular local area that you're interested in. What this actually shows is any area that is shaded in dark green or shaded in orange, that shows where that particular potential measure does fall within an area of strategic significance. So you can see here that there are some areas of orange and are some areas of dark green. So that shows where that particular potential measure is falling and would qualify for any uplift that strategic significance provides, whether that be within the biodiversity net gain metric or whether it be in any future funding programmes that require the delivery of potential measures in areas of strategic significance. If the area remains blue, as shown here, and on the various areas around the map, if the area is blue, it is not in an area of strategic significance, but it's important to remember that it has been identified that that area highlighted in blue is still an important area for delivery of that potential measure, that is an opportunity area. And if you put that direct that potential measure to that area, there will be a benefit to nature recovery. It just won't be strategically significant at a county scale. Also on the map, you can see there is a lighter green shading and a yellow, and that's basically your areas that could become of importance for biodiversity and your areas of importance for biodiversity that exist in the area you're looking at, but the potential measure has not been identified for those. And there may be the requirement, we don't quite yet know why, but there might be the requirement to look at whether your potential measure falls just in an area of particular importance for biodiversity, so are essentially protected and designated areas, or you might want to look at it whether it falls just within an area that could become of importance for biodiversity, so are areas that have been identified as target or opportunity areas. That might be because a particular funding body has said they only want to direct their funding towards a potential measure that sits in just an opportunity area, or it might be that a particular funding stream only applies to areas that sit within some formal protection or designation. So that will just allow you to flick and see the difference between the two there. So that's how the maps will be used to influence various aspects, but there are some other opportunities for how the strategy itself, and of course the spatial elements of that, will influence nature recovery in the county. So as I've said, once the strategy is published, the strategy areas planning authorities will be required to take account of the strategy in the preparation of any new local plans, any new minerals and waste plans, and any new neighbourhood plans. And this is an important role which ensures that nature and the importance of nature and the requirements for its recovery are considered alongside other needs and land uses within the county. As I have said, it's not expected that any of our revised local plans and policies that are already in place, or those that are well advanced in their process of plan revision, will be expected to sort of retrospectively apply the strategy, and it certainly isn't the case that any of the mapping or strategy will supersede or overrule any land use decisions already taken, including allocated sites and planning decisions. And again, just to remind you that the strategy is not designed as a tool to prevent development, and nor do the identified areas that could become of importance for biodiversity preclude development. But what we hope it will do, and what is certainly the intention of the design of the strategy by DEFRA, is that it will have a role in informing future local plans and also informing biodiversity net gain. And as a result, it will help steer development to deliver and to maximise the most positive outcomes for nature by focusing attention to areas where it's most needed and action that is most needed. When you come to look at the maps, you will also see that some of the areas have more than one potential measure identified, which does run the risk of being a bit confusing for anyone who is particularly interested in doing something for nature on that land as to which priority or which potential measure should be undertaken. So there's a number of reasons for why we've done that. One is that it ensures that no opportunity for nature recovery is missed, and that the very fact that we have not been able to do full-on site assessments in respect of at the local level means that it's not possible for us to really know which is the most appropriate action at that local level, and we wouldn't want to rule out something and find that actually that would have been the right measure once that site was assessed. So we have included all the potential measures for that to make sure no opportunity is missed. But also when particular landowners might be coming together and are looking at a broader area, that this will mean that a range of habitats will be considered in terms of action to be taken in that area, and that creates the mosaic of habitats that nature recovery needs to provide that sort of mosaic of habitats that so many species depend on. We will undertake further work to provide a better steer on the priorities for the published strategy, and these will be based on the application of the strategy principles hierarchy. So starting with getting everything in place that you already have in a better state, building on what's there by extending and buffering, where there's not the opportunity to extend, to establish new. And our feeling is that, again, like I said previously, by focusing action in the areas that could become of importance for biodiversity and delivering that better, bigger, more, we will result with that joined up, with that connectivity across the county that we know that is so important in terms of climate resilience and just general resilience of our species. And we'll also have a look at how we might be able to build in prioritisation of measures that offer the opportunity to deliver against our priority species, given that these have been identified as so critical. So this final slide is just really to also summarise the role of the local nature recovery strategy in terms of protecting nature, and to effectively just remind you all that actually this is a strategy for nature recovery. It provides a framework that directs action to where it's most needed and to where it delivers the greatest gain. And no aspect of the strategy itself offers any formal or otherwise protection, and that can only be provided through statutory designations, through the legislation that relates to protected sites, or local planning policy. Local authorities may choose potentially to use a strategy to identify land that could be set aside for the purposes of nature recovery. And, you know, that does relate quite nicely to that biodiversity duty I talked about, in terms of it would be quite an easy way for them to identify what areas in their county that not county, sorry, their administrative area, what areas would be really valuable to sort of prevent harmful activities going on them. But there is no requirement for them to actually do that. So while the biodiversity duty provides an incentive, it does potentially it doesn't, there's no requirement, sorry, on them to actually do that. There is the fact that one of the other ways in which it may result in not protection, but may result in some acknowledgement of the importance of the area is the areas that could become of importance for biodiversity could potentially be used to inform the government's 30 by 30 commitments. So the government have committed to effectively conserve and manage 30% of England's land and seas by 2030. And our understanding is that the local nature recovery strategies will form part of the evidence and information that might help to identify where that 30% is situated. But basically, in summary, what it is no element of the mapping should be viewed as some level of protection or prevention. But what I would like to do is just conclude, whilst I've concluded the formal overview, is just to finish by using this quote from the wonderful Sir David Attenborough to remind us of why such a strategy and the ownership and delivery of it together is so important. And also just to note to you that it's really important we hear from you on your views on the strategy, so that we can ensure that it's not only something that you can endorse and support, but also that you can adopt in the delivery of any of your action that you take for nature recovery. I will just say as well that the strategy is quite a weighty tome, and it's very long and includes various parts. So consequently, the consultation questionnaire, when you first look at it, will appear very unwieldy as well. But please don't be put off input into the consultation through the questionnaire, because you can skip all the questions that you don't feel are relevant or of something you want to comment on. So you don't have to answer every single question, and you can just focus on the particular elements of the strategy that you wish to comment on. So please don't let the long questionnaire put you off, and we really look forward to receiving your input and your thoughts. And the consultation closes on the 12th of March. So I'm very conscious that we're now 20 minutes past our advertised finish time. And I'm sure there are other questions, but what I will say is if you could just please keep it to questions and points that haven't already been raised, and the things that hopefully that I can answer, as opposed to how this actually, the information that we don't have from DEFRA and other government agencies. I'd appreciate it. And we will conclude the session at 8 o'clock. So that will be the finish time. So I'll hand over to Chris to coordinate anything coming from you in terms of questions and comments.
Okay, we've got Megan with two sort of linked mapping questions on the Slido, which is, once the consultation is complete, what will be the review period for the mapped layers, and also whether they might appear on KLIS, which she feels has increased functionality.
So the review period for the mapping is the same as the consultation. So we will not have we will not be taking any further comments on the mapped layers after the 12th of March, which is the end of the consultation. And then the other question I think was, will it appear on KLIS?
Yes.
So yes. So what we are hoping to do is to combine an update of KLIS with the inclusion of the local nature recovery strategy. But at the very least, if we don't combine the two, it certainly will be the case that all the nice bits of functionality that you have in KLIS will be available as our online planning tools. So we will make sure you have the ability to view the local nature recovery strategy maps alongside other information that might be useful to consider alongside it. And that's one of the reasons why we're waiting to see how the maps will be used in practice, so that we can make sure that that information, any information that might be relevant to that, is available and included on that online tool. And we will also, like I say, be talking to users to find out what it is that you would like to see. Obviously, we can only do what we can do within our capabilities or mapping capabilities, and also within the confines of the available budgets, but we will certainly aim to make it as user-friendly as possible. And what we really are hoping that we will do is we'll get to a point where you can just go to a map of Kent and click on an area where you're particularly interested in, and you will see from that what potential measures have been identified for that.
Okay.
Does that
Kathy's-
answer you, Megan?
I hope so. Yeah, we got a thumbs up from Megan halfway
Brilliant,
through that.
fabulous.
But there's Kathy has a question, her hand up at least. Yes.
Okay, so what I would say is the map.
There's a nasty echo as well.
Yeah, if you're not talking, could you please mute your microphones just so we can hear Kathy? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's very kind. Thank you very much. So just maps get out of date very quickly. So there's a heck of a lot of development going on. Everything is changing. How are you going to keep up to date with it is one. Second one is a protest, which is to say, I see absolute downright corruption in biodiversity units trading and also nutrient trading, where you pay to pollute rivers. So what I would really appreciate from you guys is to say we need oversight and scrutiny, because the idea can be very badly misused. Okay, so the first question is, how are you going to keep the stuff up to date? And the second one is, please ask for scrutiny, because otherwise this will just be trashed. So, okay.
Okay, so in terms of your first question about the map and become out of date, that is a very relevant point, and something that we've been considering ourselves, because once it is published, the maps remain until the review period. And it's sort of like whenever you create a map, as soon as you put a line on a map, it's a bit like sort of painting the Forth Road Bridge, isn't it? It's sort of once you've got to the end, it's time to start again. And arguably the maps will become out of date even quicker than the paint starts to peel. So it's a good point, but it's one that's not within our ability to make amendments. The regulations, that the local nature recovery strategy is underpinned by statute, and that says that once we publish it, those maps are what is used as reference, and remain as reference and are not revised until the Secretary of State requests that a review and update is undertaken. In relation to the second point, I can only say that in terms of biodiversity net gain units trading and nutrient neutrality. So nutrient neutrality is overseen by Natural England, and the biodiversity net gains trading is overseen by the local planning authority, but also in terms of trading, it goes on to a government portal, and that is overseen and scrutinised at that level. So it's not really something that I think that the local nature recovery strategy can influence hugely. We do have all of our planning authorities do have access to an ecological advice service that's provided by Kent County Council, and they do provide in-depth scrutiny of biodiversity net gain and the other ecological matters. But obviously we only advise on whether those matters have been met within the boundaries of regulations and policy, and the planning decisions that are taken. We don't advise whether something should be approved or not. It's just really we purely advise on whether the ecological requirements that are set down by legislature are met, and the same for biodiversity net gain. And then it's down to the planning authority to decide whether or not that is sufficient for determination. So yeah, I don't really have much more to say on that. I mean, they are two sort of new and emerging markets. There should be some form of regulation that applies to them, and certainly there is some form of scrutiny. Again, if that is something that you feel is not sufficient, then that's probably something that needs to be directed to either Natural England or your local planning authority, or arguably both. Any other further questions?
No further questions at the minute.
Okay, well, we are coming up to 8 o'clock, so as there's no hands up and nothing else in the Slido, I'll draw this evening to a conclusion. Thank you very much for your time this evening, for attending, and your probing and engaging questions. It's always lovely to know that there's so much interest at the local level in respect of our natural environment, and people that will keeping us on our toes. It's very welcome. Please do take the opportunity to let us know more of your thoughts through the consultation, and I will circulate the slides and a recording of this event, and on that will be also a link to all the listing of the public events that we're having, where we'll have drop-in sessions for you to come and talk to us should you wish to. So hopefully we will see you all over the course of the next couple of months, and hear for you by the 12th. But in the meantime, I wish you a good evening, and I'll call the meeting to an end. Thank you.